A few weeks back, I had the honor to sit down with my friend, mentor, and business partner, Ursula Burns. Ursula is a highly accomplished businesswoman, an outspoken champion for inclusive capitalism, racial and DEI issues, and an author. I highly encourage you to read her book, Where You Are Is Not Who You Are. I absolutely loved it. In 2009, Ursula became the CEO of Xerox, making her the first Black woman in history to be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, a title Ursula held until Rosalind Brewer and Thasunda Brown Duckett became CEOs of Fortune 500 companies this year in 2021, 12 years later. Ursula has served on the board of directors of Boston Scientific, American Express, and Nestle. Ursula is currently on the board of Uber, Exxon Mobil, the Ford Foundation, the Mayo Clinic, and MIT, to name a few. And the list of organizations that Ursula has touched and had a big impact on goes on and on and on. Ursula is truly an amazing person. Let's get started. Ursula, thank you so much for joining us at the 6th annual Raise Global Summit. I really appreciate you taking the time out.
Anything for you, Mike, you know that.
So I want to start off just saying congratulations on writing your book. It really was an amazing read. In fact, I listened to it and read parts of it, but I really liked hearing it in your own voice. One of the things that I'm curious about, growing up on the Lower East Side in New York City, what are the lessons that you learned that you carried forward in your life to help in your success?
I think one of the things I learned is how important a person can be to your success. An individual person can be someone who supports you unconditionally, someone who loves you unconditionally, someone who believes in you unconditionally. That was my mother, and we came from a really tough place. I mean, our neighborhood was, you hear it all the time, it was really that bad. Our neighborhood was really that bad. It was a bad neighborhood, drug infested, gang infested, poor. But I had a unbelievably near perfect house, near perfect. Once you walked into our apartment, sparsely furnished, kind of in not the greatest furniture, but an unbelievably structured, loving environment that believed in me and my brother and my sister, but believed in me unconditionally.
So when you think about growing up, in that way, and then when you start to go out into the world, whether that's in school or going into eventually the workforce, a theme that emerges is that people would elevate you into this sort of exceptional status and not believe, how could this person do this?
This was a tough thing for me. I talk about this in the book in a way that it took me a long time to get to the point where I realized why I was so uncomfortable with this. Because it started by people saying, "You're just amazing, Ursula, you're so amazing, you're exceptional, you're brilliant, you're authentic," all these great words. And I always felt a little uncomfortable because it's like, well, yeah, I'm okay. And I'm not overly humble. I'm pretty good, but I'm not exceptional. What I realized was that for people to feel comfortable with someone who looked like me, who came from an environment that I came from, for them to be comfortable with me being with them, they had to elevate me to being exceptional, or else there would have been more people like me in that crowd. And over and over again, I push back now. When people say you're exceptional, I say, no, I had reason. I did exactly what they did. I went to college, undergraduate school, graduate school. I did well in both of those. I had a job. I did well. I was not exceptional. I was given opportunities and supported by people. I worked reasonably hard like they did. But what we're lacking from having more people who look like me in these situations is the opportunity. It's not the performance of the individual.
So maybe that sort of goes into the next phase when you finish school and you're looking for what you're going to do in your career, and you started to intern at Xerox. And it's amazing that over 30 years you were at Xerox, eventually becoming the CEO and chairwoman, which is amazing. Maybe just talk a little bit about that experience and some of the mentors and folks that helped you out and gave you those opportunities, and then just the responsibility that you now feel as a leader to help others.
Right, because this part is amazing, right? Only because there are only 500 CEOs in the Fortune 500. There's only one CEO at a time. So it is kind of, when you have 100,000 employees over 30 years, so probably 1 million employees, right? It is pretty amazing to become the CEO. What I learned when I was a kid, which was that people gave me opportunities. People would always say to me, well, how did you decide to do whatever that was? Go to Japan, go to England, take on this job? I said, whenever people asked me to do it, I would say...
You always raised your hand.
Yeah, said sure. I mean, I figured that if they wanted me to do it, it must have been something that was important for the company to actually have done, so I actually volunteered for it. Or said yes before anybody else said yes. Very rarely negotiated the things that are very standard to negotiate today, what position, what title. It was more for me about getting the experience and the opportunity to do it. I had a huge amount of support at Xerox. I had a huge amount of support at Xerox, and I had a huge amount of support in high school, in college, when I was a child. And the reason why I wrote the book, the way that I wrote the book, was that it was more of a celebration of these people who helped than it was a celebration of me.
Saying thank you.
Yeah, it's all about thank you. I went into Xerox and I was like, I was a graduate student. I was just like anybody else, right? And that people actually believed that I could actually do stuff. They would say to me, take on this sub-module, this subsystem, to be the engineering lead on it. And I would turn around and go, you mean me? And they said, yeah, you're just as good as anybody else. And literally every time that there was something to be done, I was more often than not given the opportunity to do it.
I wonder if Anne, who was the CEO before you, so another woman, if she really had an impact on you and helped you in a different way than maybe a man would have.
Yeah, she was unbelievable. I actually almost cry when I think about her. She's alive and doing well now. I cry because I was lucky. I was lucky. So much of my life has to do with fortune, right? And great supporters, great timing, this kind of stuff like that. But Anne was perfect. Anne was 7 years my senior. She had 2 children. I had 2 children. She married a Xerox lifer.
She looked like you.
She looked like she's a woman.
She was like you.
She was like me, but she wasn't a African American woman, but she was a woman. She was a lifer at Xerox, out of college into Xerox. Her husband was a lifer at Xerox, 17 years older
Just
than
like
she
Louis,
was.
her husband,
My husband
yeah.
was 20 years older than I was. And she was called from nowhere to become the CEO. She was called the accidental CEO because the CEO prior to her didn't do well. We removed him. And I remember throughout my career, she was always 1 step to 2 steps ahead of me, always. And I was able to kind of model my life after her. We didn't live in the same neighborhoods, but we had the same kind of life. Husband, 2 children, and we would sit and talk about our life. We would grade our lives. How are you doing? Yep. She says it's an F year, and I would say, well, mine is a D year. And we would say F and D about balance of work and family and ourselves. And if it was going well, where it all seemed to fit seamlessly, then you could get maybe a B or an A. But generally, it was a D or an F, right? And she finally taught me, interestingly enough, that you have to think about your life not in these small pockets of time, that you have to think about them on average over time. And the whole point is to have a balance on average over time. But you're never going to be able to make it precise in a month or a year.
Well, it's a little bit funny to hear you talk about balance because I know how incredibly busy you are, and reading your book, hearing that not only were you the CEO of Xerox, you were a wife, a mother, and you were doing all sorts of things in the political realm, working with President Obama, President Clinton as well before that. What are some of the things that you're most proud of? I mean, your plate was incredibly full, and I know you were incredibly passionate. At the same time, you were CEO to try and help in different ways.
Yeah, because I realized that my life, I did try to help a lot, and part of it is that my life was defined by opportunity. And so the fundamental thing that I realized was that I could have been average. I would have never been a typical kid out of the ghetto. My mother made that pretty clear. That was not an option for us, right? But I would have had a pretty good life. And because of all of the support that I got, I was able to have an exceptional life. Knock wood that it continues. I'm still alive, thank goodness. And when President Obama became president, and even before that, when Hillary Clinton was a senator for our state, I really got involved in education, particularly STEM education, and immigration and jobs. These 3 things, because jobs, it's all about that. Without some level to earn a reasonable living, you're at the mercy of quote unquote the system. To get to that point, you have to have an education that's reasonable. And if you think about America, and if you think about women and underrepresented minorities in America, if there is one thing that is for sure, that we are failing to educate the masses in STEM, in science, technology, engineering, and math. And just about every single problem, every single opportunity, all of the great jobs have something to do with STEM. And we almost systematically eliminate these options from women and from underrepresented minorities. So I got really engaged with that. I got really engaged with immigration and really engaged with trade, because we are 350 million people. The world is 7.5 billion. If we're just going to play in our old pond, we just don't have enough to support ourselves.
As you're talking, it made me think about two things. So one, it seemed to catch a lot of people off guard that you supported Hillary Clinton versus Barack Obama. So a woman versus a black man, and just people's assumption that you would support a black man, period.
Absolutely.
Maybe just a little bit about
this
that.
Is a thing that I always struggle with, right? So I literally got, held up against the wall, right? How dare you support Hillary Clinton? And I was surprised. I said, well, this is going to be the first woman president. And they said, but you'd have the first black president. I said, well, I have to choose. You
can't be both?
I can't be both, right. I can't support both. Or what makes being a black person more important for me, than being a woman? And people assume, because race is such a big deal in this country, but around the world, people assume that before anything, I'm black. Before anything, I'm black. By the way, before anything, I'm black. Mm-hmm. But you should also say, before anything, I'm a woman. Mm-hmm. So I don't actually point to that. I thought it was fairly natural to support Hillary Clinton. I got, like I said, railed on it. After she lost the primaries, I flipped over with the help of Vernon Jordan, who was a big Hillary supporter as well. And I met Barack Obama on the night of the concession that Hillary said, I give it to you. At a hotel in New York City, I met this man, Barack Obama, who I was still skeptical about, because I didn't know him. I spent most of the time with my state senator, a senator from New York State. And from that point that I met him on, he was actually one of the most inspirational people that I had met. He's just a really intelligent, caring young man. And I can say young man because he's a little bit younger than I am.
Well, I never had the chance to meet him, but maybe I will at some point.
I'm going to make sure that
I will take him up on that for
I'm
sure. One of the other things that I've heard you talk a lot about is inclusive capitalism. Maybe just unpack that a little bit.
We have a system in this country and in the world that has worked pretty well. I mean, look at roads are built, and schools are built, and government is structured, and taxes are paid, and we have an army and all the stuff that supports a well-functioning economy. But what we found out over time, from the time that this system started, that it started with certain people in superior positions and other people, by definition, for the system to work, other people had to be in inferior positions. It was Native Americans, it was blacks, it was women for a long time. And so this model of capitalism that we have is not a fair or equally distributed model of capitalism. What we have to do, and we're seeing it now more than ever, right? The pandemic made it really clear that we now call these people who we would not pay $15 an hour, what we would call a living wage. People said, we don't have to do that. They became essential workers. Mm-hmm. Essential workers that we pay $7 an hour, $8 an hour, they couldn't be that essential right before. What happened is we started to build this unbelievable chasm between, in this capitalist system, the people who have and the people who don't have. I don't think that I'm not I'm not a socialist. Mm-hmm. You have to, there's differential wages for differential effort or differential skills. I believe in all of that. What we had gotten to, though, is that the structure depends on subservience and superiority. The economic structure depends on that, and we have to change that. 3 things happened. One was this pandemic, which we were all home getting our food delivered to us by Uber Eats or Grubhub or whatever what's your
DoorDash.
Or DoorDash, right? One of these guys who riding their bikes out, right? They're risking their lives for us. Yeah. That's one. We realized at the same time that we had gotten this country to a point where if you were an African American person, particularly an African American man, your life was worth less than if you were anybody else in the society. We saw that with George Floyd, where we watched literally a policeman kill a man, and they had some mental justification for that because he was something less than human. Second thing that we saw. And the third thing that we saw was that women over time had started to say, wait a minute now, this is not reasonable. The way that we're paid, still 80 cents on the dollar to a man, the way that we have to give up certain things that we required for respect to actually make it. All of this happened at the same time, in a very positive way, I think. And we had a crazy leader. I'm sorry for.
Yeah, no, you and I have had a conversation about this before. That it feels like finally the conversation is here to stay.
It can't. I don't believe. I'm told all the time that I'm a little bit too optimistic on this, but I think we saw in this election that against a lot of odds, President Trump lost the election on the backs of people who said enough is enough, both black and white. It's a wake-up call for everybody. They said basically, the economic return was good, Wall Street's doing phenomenally, my house value is going up, but there's something that doesn't ring true to the message. And we have to, even if I support some of the philosophy, we can't have such a divided nation. We cannot have so many people on one side of the fence and the other people on the other side of the fence and still call ourselves America. We have to change something fundamentally. I think that what happened at this time is we had a pandemic, we have this racial awakening, and we had leadership that literally wasn't filling any of the gaps, so people said, I had to do it ourselves. I think it's going to be hard to go backwards on this. Yeah. But one of the reasons why people say, how come you're so confident? I said, because I'm not going to stay silent. None of us can stay silent. If we shut up, and let's let it go back to quote unquote normal, it will go back to normal.
So maybe this brings a topic that's relevant to the group here, just around, venture capital is all about finding great businesses, finding new markets, finding big markets, and then finding people who are going to be the great leaders of the future. And I think it folds into the conversation we're having. How do you find those in your own? You've started a PE fund called Integrum, and how you're building that in a different way. But maybe just advice to people on how do you help companies be great, and what are the things that you look at when you're evaluating investments yourself?
One of the things that I figured out was that things can be done differently, Mike. If we know a way to have it work. We know this way. We also know the downfalls and pitfalls of that way, right? We are in a climate crisis. I don't think anybody can debate it. We have a racial issue. We have a wealth distribution issue. By the way, a lot of people are living well, me included, right? We're doing okay. And the model fundamentally works. But we are, as my mother would say, I'm going to say something that you may have to cut out. My mother would say, when you're tearing the ass out of something, it goes from good to bad, right? When you overdo it, right? If you drink too much, if you smoke, same thing is happening here. We're overdoing some of the bad things and maybe some of the good things, and we have to kind of even it out over time. Integrum, the private equity firm Plum, you and I are involved in it, a special purpose acquisition company, a SPAC that we did it, and some other things that I'm engaged in are all around sticking my nose in places that I wasn't even invited to be in before, to see whether or not, because I know, not to see whether, because I know that you can do it in a way that is more inclusive, that's more diverse, that's more considerate of the globe, that's more equal, right, and more just better on average. I don't believe I can wish for that to happen. I just, these guys should do it differently. I believe that we have to form partnerships with people who have the same fundamental beliefs and try to move the world in a different direction. That's all it's about.
I mean, I agree with you 100%, and it's events like this where people are talking about these issues and having these conversations, and hopefully it means that everybody here starting funds, in funds, investing in funds, is looking at how to do that through a different lens than they were before.
Absolutely. It's
and
not only about the money.
Change.
Yeah, it's not only about the money. The money is really important. It's about the money, it's about the people, it's about the planet, it's about, it's about goodness it's about the animals, it's about everything, right? We can't just, I guess, continuing on the path that we're on now, I know, without knowing a lot of the science, is going to be a destructive path. Our children, your son, your son's children, my children, and they are going to pay the price at the end of the day. They probably have a lot more money and be able to protect themselves than the average citizen. Sure. But that's not, I don't think any of us thought of a world where we live in some of the nations that I visit, where, there's a very, outside of the walls of the palace, there's squalor and destruction. That's not what we want here. And so I think one of the things I like about the engagements I have in new forms of capitalism, not just inclusive capitalism, but a new way of looking at a PE firm, a new way to bring a company public, is to try to bring in more voices, different voices into that, so that we can be more inclusive in the decisions and in the solutions. So we don't, I was on the board, I'm still on the board, I was on the board of Uber before it went public, and Uber's an amazing company. It's a machine. The thing that happened is that we had a great start, a great founder, but he ran out of steam. Yeah. But not
certainly in the news a lot. Travis was definitely in the news
a lot, right? So because he needed more a wider lens. Fortunately, he realized it with sort of the help of external forces and brought in a different mix of people, a fairly diverse board, a very, very good and diverse leader, to think about. The women get in that car just like men get in the Uber cars, and they need to feel safe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And how do we actually think about that before we design the solution, not after we design the solution and it blows up in our face? That's what VC firms and PE firms have to start thinking about. It's harder to fix it after it's there. Why don't we just design it right in the first place? So when we, Michael, you and I are in an arrangement together called Plum, we thought about this. We wanted to make sure that we could, from the beginning, design a set of advisors that had as much experience as possible, different from our own, as many, not just financial experience or life experience, but also, where they lived experience, just everything, because we know that solution will be better over time.
Well, I wish that everyone had an Ursula in their life, and so I'm really happy that everybody had a small glimpse into some of the things and experiences that you've been through, and it's been great to hear you share some of your thoughts. I don't know if there's anything else you just wanted to sort of leave everybody with.
You know what? The title of my book is something my mother used to say to me all the time. This thing that's called, she would say, Max, my middle name is Maxine, where you are is not who you are, and remember that when you're rich and famous. Think about the words, where you are. So people sitting in this conference, you're in a pretty exalted space right now. I mean, you're one of a couple of hundred where there are probably tens of thousands who want to walk in. That's not who you are. Remember that regular people in the world, the guy who delivers your garbage, etc., all have value in the world, and we have to actually treat them that way and include them. That's number one. And number two, my mother would always say, leave behind more than you take away. That's how we're going to be judged in the world. This sounds kind of like religion. I'm not trying to get there. I think that we've just swung the pendulum a little bit too far in one direction. We have to move it back a little bit more to the center. We have a world to be concerned about. We have other humans to be concerned about. We can do this. We can actually create great companies, but do it better today than we've done it ever in the past. I think it's possible if people think about it and start right.
Ursula, I cannot thank you enough.
You're welcome.
You're an absolutely inspirational and amazing person, and I'm very happy to call you my friend.
Thank you. I mean, as you know, I'm thrilled to call you my friend. So.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Welcome.